The kitchen window cast a warm glow on the worn wooden surface, a calm light that should have signified a peaceful start to the day. But in the air between Eric and me, tension was suffocating. He paced back and forth on the creaky floorboards, his irritation palpable in each heavy step. The argument from the night before still clung to the room like a thick fog that refused to dissipate. Eric's sister, Marie, had once again demanded financial help. It wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. She'd asked for my credit card to cover her so-called emergencies, which usually turned out to be another shopping spree or impulsive purchase. When I firmly refused, it set off a chain reaction that culminated in Eric's fury. I sipped my coffee, its bitter taste matching the atmosphere in the room. His pacing was making me anxious, but I tried to maintain a calm exterior, even though I could feel his eyes drilling into me silently, demanding that I change my mind. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. This had gone on for too long. Eric, I said softly, breaking the silence, we need to talk about this rationally. We can't keep enabling Marie's irresponsible spending habits. It's not fair to us, and it's not helping her in the long run. Eric stopped pacing and turned to face me, his face flushed with anger. Not fair. Not helping, Lena? She's my sister. We have to help family when they're in need. How can you be so selfish? I flinched at his words but stood my ground. It's not selfish to set boundaries, Eric. We've helped her countless times before, and nothing has changed. She needs to learn to manage her own finances. Eric's nostrils flared, and I saw the vein in his forehead pulse. You don't understand. You've never had siblings. You don't know what it's like to have that responsibility. His words stung, but I pushed past the hurt. I may not have siblings, but I understand responsibility. And right now, our responsibility is to our own financial stability. We can't keep draining our resources to bail Marie out of her self-imposed crises. For a moment, Eric seemed to deflate slightly. Maybe, just maybe, my words had gotten through to him. But then his eyes hardened, and I knew I was wrong. You're going to give Marie your credit card, he said, his voice low and threatening. She's coming here later today, and you're going to hand it over with a smile on your face. Do you understand me? A chill ran down my spine at his tone, but I refused to back down. No, Eric. I won't do that. We need to help Marie in other ways, ways that will actually benefit her in the long run. Maybe we could help her create a budget or find a financial advisor. Before I could finish, Eric lunged for his coffee mug on the counter and hurled it at my face. Time seemed to slow down as I watched the dark liquid arc through the air. Then, in an instant, scalding coffee splashed across my cheek, neck, and blouse, pain searing through my skin as I gasped in shock. The mug clattered to the floor, shattering into pieces that scattered across the kitchen tiles. I instinctively raised my hands to my face, feeling the heat radiating from my skin. Eric roared out, his voice echoing off the kitchen walls. You'll pay for this. Marie is coming here later, and you better give her your damn credit card or get the hell out. His words were like venom, burning through me even more than the hot coffee. I stared at him in disbelief, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The man I had married, the man I once loved with all my heart, had now shown me the depths of his entitlement and cruelty. Trembling, I wiped at my face with a kitchen towel. The sting of the coffee was nothing compared to the ache in my heart. I watched as Eric stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him with such force that the framed photos on the wall rattled. For a few moments, I sat frozen, staring at the mess scattered across the table and floor. Coffee dripped slowly from the edge of the table, forming a small puddle on the floor. Shards of the broken mug glinted in the morning light. It was as if the shattered ceramic represented the broken pieces of our marriage. The initial shock of what had just happened seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. As I stared at the mess on the floor, my heart began to race, the cold sensation of betrayal spreading through me. The house, once a place where we had built our life together, now felt like a prison. The walls that had once held our dreams seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with the weight of Eric's anger and Marie's endless demands. I stood up shakily, my coffee-stained blouse clinging uncomfortably to my skin. The heat from my face where the coffee had splashed was starting to subside, but the emotional burn was still fresh. I looked around the kitchen, the memories of happier times flooding my mind, Eric and I laughing as we painted the walls, our first Thanksgiving dinner together when we burned the turkey but still managed to have a wonderful time. These memories now felt tainted, overshadowed by the ugliness of the present. I made my way to the bathroom, wincing as I examined my reflection in the mirror. My cheek was red and irritated from the hot coffee, and I could already see the beginnings of a bruise forming. As I gently cleaned my face, I couldn't help but wonder how we had gotten to this point. When had Eric's love for his sister turned into this toxic obsession? When had I become the enemy in my own marriage? The reflection staring back at me looked like a stranger, someone who had been worn down, who had let herself be consumed by someone else's demands. I ran a cool compress over my cheek and stood there, staring at my reflection, trying to make sense of everything. Then, like a sudden strike of lightning, the thought hit me: maybe, just maybe, I needed to leave. The thought terrified me. Could I really leave? Where would I go? What would I do? But as I looked at my own eyes, seeing the hurt and fear reflected there, I knew I didn't have a choice. I couldn't stay here anymore. Eric had crossed an unforgivable line, and I owed it to myself to draw my own line in the sand. I shakily reached for my phone. I needed help. I needed to figure out my next steps. As I scrolled through my contacts, the weight of isolation settled over me. Most of my friends had drifted away over the years, put off by Eric's controlling behavior or my constant excuses. I paused on CLA's name, my best friend from college, the one who had always been there for me, even when I had pushed her away. I hesitated, guilt washing over me as I remembered all the times I had ignored her concerns about Eric. But I pushed past the guilt and pressed the call button. As the phone rang, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't and wouldn't be Eric's punching bag anymore. The phone continued to ring, and with each passing second, my resolve grew stronger. Whatever happened next, I would face it on my own terms. No more compromising my values, no more sacrificing my well-being for someone else's demands. The phone rang several times before CLA's familiar voice came through. "Lena, is everything okay?" The concern in her voice was like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of panic. I don't know," I whispered, feeling the tears begin to build. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, CLA. Eric, he threw coffee at me today. I can't keep living like this." There was a pause, and then I heard her breath catch. "What? Lena, that's abuse. No one should treat you like that, especially not the man you're married to." I couldn't hold it back anymore. The tears spilled over, and my voice cracked as I continued. "I've been making excuses for him for so long. But today, after everything, he crossed a line. I don't know who he is anymore. The man I loved, the man I thought I knew, is gone. And I don't know if I can stay with him." CLA's voice softened, filled with compassion. "Lena, you don't have to stay in a situation like this. You don't owe him anything. You deserve to be safe, to be treated with respect. If you're ready to leave, I'll be here for you, every step of the way. You don't have to do this alone." I took a shaky breath, feeling both terrified and relieved. "I don't know where to start. I don't have anywhere to go." "Of course you do. You can come stay with me. I've got a guest room, and I'm not going to let you face this alone. You need a safe place, and you've got one here. I'll help you figure out the next steps. But first, I need you to know that you are not alone in this." Her words, so firm and reassuring, struck a chord deep within me. It had been so long since I had felt like someone truly had my back, like I wasn't just a support for everyone else, but someone who mattered too. I felt a tiny spark of hope stir in my chest for the first time in years. "I don't even know where to go from here," I whispered. "What do I do next?" "First, you need to take care of yourself. Let's talk through everything, okay? I'll help you make a plan. But for now, just pack a bag and get out of there. We'll handle the rest. You've made the hardest decision. You've chosen yourself, Lena. And I'm proud of you." Her words gave me the strength I needed. Okay. I'm going to pack a bag. I'll be there soon. Thank you, CLA. I don't know what I would have done without you." "No need to thank me," she said softly. "You're my best friend. And I'm not going to let you go through this alone. Just get here, and we'll figure everything else out." I ended the call with a mixture of fear and relief. As I looked around the house, at the shattered mug on the floor and the quiet emptiness that had replaced the once shared warmth, I felt a deep sense of finality settle in. I wasn't just leaving Eric, I was leaving behind the life I had built with him, the life that had slowly suffocated me for years. With shaky hands, I packed a small suitcase, grabbing only the essentials. Clothes, a few sentimental items, and the emergency cash I had kept hidden for years. I paused when I reached for my phone and realized I needed to make one last call. I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at my lawyer's name. I had to start taking the steps toward the future, toward my freedom. As I dialed the number, I felt a sense of determination flood through me. For the first time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was reclaiming my life. The drive to CLA's house felt surreal. The streets that I had once walked down with Eric, hand in hand, now seemed foreign to me. It was like I was leaving not just a house, but an entire life, a version of myself I had lost somewhere along the way. The familiar sights of the neighborhood blurred past me, but I wasn't sure where I was going anymore. The only certainty I had was that I couldn't go back. When I arrived at CLA's house, my heart was a chaotic mix of emotions. I had no idea what awaited me beyond those doors, but something deep inside me knew that this was the right choice. As I sat in my car, staring at the cozy two-story house, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. Would this really be the refuge I needed? Would I be able to rebuild the life I had lost? Before I could spiral into doubts, the front door flew open. CLA rushed out, her red curls flying, and her face lit up with concern and warmth. Without hesitation, she pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so glad you're here," she murmured, and I felt all the fear and uncertainty I had been holding back start to dissolve. In that moment, I wasn't alone. I was safe. She led me inside, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I stepped into a space where I could breathe. The smell of coffee and breakfast wafted from the kitchen, the sound of children's laughter echoed from the living room, and I realized that, for all the years I had spent trying to hold things together in my marriage, I had been starved of these simple, beautiful moments of peace. CLA guided me to the kitchen, where her kids, Emma and Jack, were chattering excitedly about their day. They greeted me with hugs and eager smiles, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine sense of belonging. They didn't know the details of why I was there, but they didn't need to. In their innocence, they gave me the gift of comfort, of normalcy. As we sat down to eat, I felt a warmth in my chest that had been absent for years. This was what a family should feel like, uncomplicated, full of love, and free of manipulation. The realization hit me like a wave. I had spent so much time trying to make a life with someone who had never truly respected me, who had always made me feel small. Now, I was in a place where I could breathe again, where I could be myself. Later that afternoon, CLA and I sat down to talk through everything. I recounted the last few years, the slow unraveling of my marriage, and how for so long, I had made excuses for Eric's behavior. He made me feel like I wasn't enough, like my needs didn't matter, I confessed, the words coming out in a rush. I thought if I just loved him enough, he'd change. But he never did. And now, I don't even recognize him anymore. CLA's eyes softened, filled with empathy. "Lena, you weren't the problem. He's the one who couldn't see you, who couldn't value you for the person you are. And you've been carrying that weight for far too long." Her words stung, but in the best way possible. It was the truth I had been denying, the truth that I needed to hear in order to move forward. After a while, we made a plan. First, I would get in touch with a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases, someone who could guide me through the legal process. Then, I'd start thinking about what kind of life I wanted for myself. CLA even suggested I visit a local bookstore where her cousin worked. It wasn't much, but it was a chance for me to get back to something I had always loved, books. And the thought of working in a bookstore, surrounded by stories and the smell of ink, made my heart stir with hope. By the end of the day, I had already started to feel a shift inside me. The fear that had been holding me back was slowly being replaced with a quiet strength, a knowing that this was the beginning of something new. Something just for me. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, fear, uncertainty, but also a growing sense of liberation. The weight I had carried for so long was slowly beginning to lift. Every time I stepped away from the house, away from Eric and Marie's demands, I felt lighter. Every day at CLA's was a reminder that I didn't need to be tied to the toxicity of my past. There was a world outside of Eric's control, and it was waiting for me. One morning, after breakfast, I made the decision to go to the bookstore where Megan, CLA's cousin, worked. CLA had suggested it as a fresh start. I hadn't worked in years, not since Eric had insisted I take a part-time job as a librarian. It had always felt like a compromise, a place to fit in his vision of what my life should look like, rather than my own. But now, the thought of working at a bookstore, surrounded by people who loved stories as much as I did, made my heart beat faster. The cozy little bookstore, the Cozy Corner, was tucked away in a quiet part of town. When I walked inside, the scent of fresh paper and coffee enveloped me. It was perfect, peaceful, warm, and welcoming. Megan greeted me with her bubbly personality and a wide smile. "I'm so glad you came by," she said, her eyes scanning me with a knowing glance. "CLA told me what's been going on. If you're looking for something new, this could be the place. It's not much, but it's a start. And I think you'll love it here." Her kindness was a balm to my frayed nerves. After a brief chat, she took me on a tour of the shop, introducing me to the staff and showing me around. The shelves were filled with every kind of book imaginable: fiction, non-fiction, cookbooks, children's stories. I felt at home immediately, surrounded by something familiar and comforting. Megan led me to the back office, where we sat down, and she explained that they were looking for help. "We don't have a big budget, but we could use someone to help out with stocking and customer service. The hours are flexible, and it could give you some breathing room to figure things out." I smiled, relieved that I didn't have to make any huge commitments right away. "I'd love to help out. I'm just looking for a way to get back to something I love, something that feels like me." Megan nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "I get it. And trust me, Lena, this place is about more than just books. It's about the people, the community. You're welcome here." By the time I left the bookstore, my mind was racing with possibilities. This wasn't just a job, this was the start of something new. A life where I could breathe again, where I could rebuild myself and find peace. When I returned to CLA's house that evening, I felt a sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced in years. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer CLA recommended. I was ready to take the next steps toward divorce. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. And then, later that week, I took another step. I found a small apartment. It wasn't much, just a studio, but it was mine. It was the first place I'd had to myself in years, the first place where I could truly begin to heal. The day I moved out of CLA's and into my new apartment, I stood in the middle of the room, taking in the bare walls and empty spaces. It wasn't much, but it was a fresh start. I felt a mixture of excitement and fear as I began to unpack my things. It was a strange sensation, this feeling of being completely alone, but for the first time in so long, it didn't feel lonely. It felt freeing. As I set up my small desk and looked out the window at the city skyline, I realized that I wasn't running away from something anymore. I was running towards something, my own future. I didn't have to be defined by Eric, by his needs, or by his family. For the first time in a long time, I had a future that was mine to shape. The first few days in my new apartment felt surreal. Every small sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, the soft rustle of leaves outside the window, reminded me of how different everything was now. The emptiness of the space didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. Instead, it felt like a blank canvas, waiting for me to fill it with my own story. I woke up early every morning, a quiet sense of purpose settling in my chest. The days felt like new beginnings, and I had no one to answer to but myself. The small victories I had achieved already, the job at the bookstore, the lawyer's appointment, felt like building blocks, each one adding a little more strength to the foundation I was creating for myself. But there were moments, too, when the reality of my situation crept in. I couldn't deny the fear that still lingered, especially whenever I thought about Eric. It hadn't been easy to walk away, and it wasn't going to be easy to untangle myself from him. The divorce process was long and painful, but with each passing day, I knew I was one step closer to freedom. One evening, after a long day of shelving books at the Cozy Corner, I sat on the couch in my apartment, flipping through an old journal. I found myself reading old notes, old dreams I had written down before everything had gone sideways. I had forgotten what it felt like to dream, to imagine a life that wasn't clouded by Eric's control. It felt foreign but comforting. Then, I heard the sound of a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I thought it might be Eric. He hadn't contacted me yet, but that didn't mean he wouldn't try. But when I opened the door, it wasn't him. It was CLA. She was standing there, her smile wide and reassuring. "Hey, I thought I'd stop by and check on you. I brought some wine. I figured we could use a little celebration." I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders just seeing her there. "Celebration? What for?" CLA laughed, stepping inside. "For making it this far, Lena. For choosing yourself. For standing strong." I couldn't help but feel a rush of emotion at her words. I had come so far, maybe not as far as I wanted yet, but far enough to realize that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. We sat on the couch together, talking for hours. She asked me how I was settling in, if I was getting used to the new routine. I told her about the bookstore, how it felt like I was finally doing something for me, for the first time in years. And with each word I spoke, I realized just how much I had grown in such a short amount of time. CLA was proud of me, but more importantly, I was proud of myself. I had finally reached a place where I wasn't afraid to live for myself, where I wasn't defined by someone else's expectations. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it no longer felt terrifying. I was learning to trust myself again, to believe that I was capable of more than just surviving. As the evening wore on, we laughed, drank wine, and shared stories. The warmth of her friendship reminded me that, even in the hardest times, there was light. And for the first time, I could see it. I knew there would still be hard days ahead, days where Eric would try to manipulate me, days when I would feel overwhelmed by everything I had to do. But I also knew something more important. I wasn't alone in this anymore. I had friends, I had support, and I had a future that I was now free to create on my own terms. And that thought, more than anything, gave me strength.